We're joined today by author Richie Unterberger. We're talking about his new book, Bob Marley and the Wailers, The Ultimate Illustrated History. Richie, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Dustin.
Well, the new book, Bob Marley and the Wailers, The Ultimate Illustrated History, is out, and obviously it says it all there in the title, but could you talk a little bit about the new book and how it came to be?
I hope that it ties together not just the basics of Bob Marley and the Wailers' career, but also in a way that lets readers know both how important his message was and clears up some of the many contradictory stories and sort of uncertain details about his life that you find in numerous biographies and other sources.
Yeah, you really go in depth with Marley's life, all the way back to the beginning. It was wild to see the early days with him having short hair and wearing a suit. That's not really the Bob Marley most people know.
Yeah, they almost look like the Temptations or a group like that when you see the really early photos from when they were only putting out records in Jamaica, only known in Jamaica in the mid-1960s. But one of the reasons I wanted to write the book the most is that I think that Marley and the Wailers did some of their best music in the 10 years or so before they became known all around the world, when they signed to Island Records and they put out the Catch a Fire album. It's music that should really be heard, and it also is music that gives you a lot of insight into how much he developed from the roots of his music, which was ska, kind of an up-tempo party music, and then the rhythm slowed down and a more serious lyrical attitude started to inform the records that he and the Wailers wrote and recorded.
It's amazing the success that he had and the output, and really what was not that long of a career, I guess.
Yeah, and he recorded with the Wailers a lot in Jamaica before they made their international breakthrough when they were based in London. And I also want to note, the book is called Bob Marley and the Wailers, because although Marley is by far the most famous of the Wailers, the most famous reggae musician, one of the most famous musicians anywhere, the Wailers were a real group up until the time they had their international breakthrough. And although the lineup changed a few times, Peter Tosh and Bunny Livingston, who later took the name Bunny Wailer, they were also really good singers and writers, although they didn't write and sing lead as much as Bob Marley did. So they were an important part of the story too, and I also cover some of what they did after they left the Wailers. But yes, certainly in the 7 or 8 years after Bob Marley's records started to be really widely available, he produced a lot of music, but also music of different sorts. He's most known, and I think I understand why it gets the most attention, for his songs of protest and social commentary, but he also did some just good out and out feel-good party songs and love songs. All of that is important to what made Bob Marley a really internationally accessible artist.
And the photos in the book are amazing. I love seeing the pictures of the old 45s and the flyers and stuff, and some of the pictures of the things you just mentioned there where maybe a lot of the fans didn't realize existed.
Yeah, when you look at the old Jamaican-only records, the production facilities in Jamaica were quite a bit behind the state-of-the-art facilities in the United States, like at Motown Records, or in London at Island Records. And it's just an amazing story, I think, of a musician from a pretty impoverished background in a really small developing country, Jamaica, only about 2 million people then, who more than anyone, although he had a lot of help, brought reggae music and therefore a big part of the culture of Jamaica to the world. And when you talk about some of the illustrations, there are a lot of photos, but the posters and the advertisements, one of my favorites is there's an advertisement for one of Bob Marley's first appearances in the United States in 1973 in New York, and he shared the bill with Bruce Springsteen. Can you imagine seeing both of those performers right at the time they are starting to become well known, but they're not famous yet? Springsteen had just put out their first album, but it was important for Marley to do those kinds of shows to break his music through a barrier to an international audience, mostly a white rock audience that had never heard reggae music before.
Yeah, that's one of those shows that there was probably a couple hundred people there, but I'm sure thousands of people probably claim that they were there that night.
Yeah. And he shared some interesting bills, like with Sly and the Family Stone, but certainly by the end of the 70s, he was a headliner. And another, I think, amazing aspect of Marley's career is that he became really popular in areas that English wasn't even the main spoken language, like Italy or parts of Africa. And to this day, when you travel around the world, I've been lucky enough to go to a lot of countries. Bob Marley songs are among the most likely you are to hear when you hear performers like on a sidewalk or outside restaurants playing for change. I was in Sicily 6 years ago, and it seems like more of those performers were doing Marley songs than anyone else's except the Beatles.
Well, Richie, you mentioned traveling around. Did you spend much time in Jamaica doing the research for the book?
I have to be honest, I have not been to Jamaica. I would like to go. I did a lot of research through material being written about and illustrating Bob Marley. But did you have a question relating to that?
I have been to Jamaica within the last 10 years. It was more of a touristy kind of setup, but still, even down there, there's pictures of Bob everywhere, and people are selling his merchandise. I mean, he's definitely helping out the economy of Jamaica still.
Yeah, and although I don't think it's one of the more important aspects of Bob Marley's story, it's amazing how much merchandise you see of Marley on T-shirts. One of the places I teach is the University of San Francisco. And I was waiting at a bus stop, like right across the street from the main campus building. And it looked like a student, like maybe 19 or so years old. She had a handbag that was embossed with Bob Marley. And if you travel around like to Europe and you have a Bob Marley t-shirt, well, anywhere in the United States too, or North America, people just recognize it instantly. It's like an international goodwill symbol.
Well, Richie, where do you think Bob's career would have gone had he lived? Did dying at a young age kind of add to that legend, or do you think he could have become maybe even bigger as the years went on?
That's an interesting question, and I'll answer it from two angles. Would he have become bigger as time went on? Yes, but even though maybe his early death initially sparked interest in his life and his music, something that's amazing about his career and his records is that they actually became a lot more well-known after he died and continue to be really well-known and sell a lot of copies. He has an enormous amount of multi-generational appeal, including to a lot of people who weren't born when he was making music or when he had passed away. And I think that can't just be attributed to sort of a mystique around his early death. I think it speaks to the eternal appeal of the music. But as to where he would have gone musically, it's impossible to answer. It's like trying to speculate, where would Buddy Holly have gone? He died at the age of 22. He'd already accomplished a lot.
Sure.
But I think there might be a clue in one of his most famous, and I think one of his best songs, Redemption Song. If you had not heard Bob Marley before, you wouldn't necessarily think that he was a reggae artist just based on that song. It's written and played almost sort of like a folk song, or what we in North America call a singer-songwriter style. And maybe he would have, using reggae as a base, gone in some other directions which weren't specifically reggae, whether it was that sort of folky, reflective song like Redemption Song. Also, he was one of the first performers to go to Africa, play reggae music there, and African music attained a much greater level of visibility after he died, with performers like Fela and King Sunny Ade from Nigeria. It's intriguing, especially I'm sure he would have gone back there to play and maybe been more exposed to that music. Maybe he would have integrated elements of world music into what he was doing, what we call world music, music from outside of North America or even this hemisphere. And there might have been some interesting musical developments that would have come from that. But as we all know, tragically, he didn't get that opportunity.
Well, of course, he's still as relevant now as ever. I mean, they got the new Bob Marley One Love movie set to be released. And as you mentioned, you still see kids at the mall with handbags and, kids in the dorms with his posters. I mean, he's definitely transcended music and is kind of, I don't know what you would call that, just a major icon of just pop culture in general.
I would agree with that he's an icon, not just of music, but of popular culture. And I think one reason that his music was able to achieve that was his lyrics had very specific messages, but they were phrased in a way that was very direct and understandable. And that, I think, is part of the reason he has such a big international audience, including in a lot of countries where English isn't the main language, not just Italy, Japan, and several African countries. And even though he had a lot to say in his lyrics about the underprivileged, I think that's a big part of his appeal in places like Africa, there is often a very uplifting feel to his music. Even in some of the most direct comments about social injustice. I Shot the Sheriff, one of his most famous songs. Get up, stand up for your rights. But there are also songs like Jamming, which are just feel-good songs, where even if you don't know about Marley or the conditions in Jamaica, which produced him and reggae music, it's very immediately accessible and understandable.
Definitely. Well, again, Richie, I know the book is just out. Is there anything else maybe coming up for you or something else we should be watching out for?
Sure. Well, this isn't for the same publisher, but the book that I'm working on now, I've done about 15 music history books. The book that I'm in the process of getting toward the final stages of finishing is a biography of the Velvet Underground, Lou Reed's group, and that should be published in the middle of next year, 2025. It's not like the book that I've just done, which is sort of a coffee table book with a lot of illustrations, a lot of text too. The Velvet Underground book is a standard biography narrative, which is very long. It might be 750 pages. So I hope that it's more in-depth than anything that's been done about that group ever.
Excellent. Well, I'm looking forward to that. And again, the new book, Bob Marley and the Wailers, The Ultimate Illustrated History, a beautiful book, and I encourage everybody out there to check it out. And Richie, again, thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Dustin.
And again, that was Richie Unterberger. His new book, Bob Marley and the Wailers, The Ultimate Illustrated History, is available now.